Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today on Credit Chats and its reviewed version, because we just updated a little bit our Credit Chats to the place where interesting and great credit people, except me, I'm very far from being great, discussing great ideas about credit. And well, according to even to my favorite book, Good to Great, favorite business book, it always considered as, something great is considered as something wide, something great, something big. But at the same time, we all know that great things could happen in the macro world and the micro world. So today we go deep into details together with Mr. Morris, fellow ICM and one of the greatest credit managers I know in my life. Brad, you are welcome.
Thank you very much.
Chats. So today, as you noticed from the from the announcement, we will be looking at, I use in my terminology, I use the whole name is trade credit security. Although today we will be a little bit far from trade credit. We will go into the financial world, but I still believe that the item or assignment of receivables has actually an application in trade credit, or will have in the future. Who knows? So Brad has a unique experience with working with trade, with the assignment of receivables, and he kindly agreed to share his views and his experience on this unique type of credit security with us. So, Brad, you are welcome. Would you like to say something like initial, or you would like to go exactly directly with straight with your presentation?
No, thanks very much for the introduction. Very, very humble. Thank you so very much, Andrew. Really appreciate your support there. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of their day to attend. I do hope this is an interactive event. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that I have. From the outset, I will say I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on television. So there might be some legal questions that surround this particular topic. I will do my best to answer them, but understand that is only from experience. This particular topic is rather, it's not the standard trade credit that you and I have seen. This one is a little more for the mid to larger ticket. Now, I've had experience with doing this in the telecoms and technology industry, where there are large projects that need to be financed, and this is a particular way of financing it. So I'd like to go through it if I can. I think you might need to give me the car keys on the slide deck, Andrew, just so I can share.
Yeah, absolutely. Just 1 second. Yes, now you are able to.
So I'm good to go. Right, just one moment. I will press the machine and see how I go. So, how's it coming across, Andrew? Looking good?
Yeah, I did. Except
okay, then
me,
fine.
everything's great.
Okay, then thanks very much. Really appreciate it. So going to go through this and just give an idea of what is an assignment of receivables. Why is it a thing? Do we need to really get that on our radar? I'm going to compare it against the CapEx model, and then I'm going to show you how this whole thing works. And if there's any questions, just Andre, I'm assuming we've got a chat of some kind that we can pop questions up.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat, and but before we start, just for my preliminary understanding, I mean, as far as I can judge from the name, the assignment of receivables is that, let's give it like general definition from the very beginning. This means that somebody assigns, like there is a company which borrows something, equipment, capital, whatever, and then they assign their receivables to a creditor.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I'll show it here. I actually got a really
Oh,
bad.
it's
By the way,
already
there's
on
a
the
lot of
site.
really tacky PowerPoint animation and graphics. I've tried to declutter it as much as I possibly can, but there should be something here. So let's have a look.
Okay.
So
Okay.
first of
Let's go
all,
ahead.
the TL. How's it looking? Okay, so this is the TLDR. Didn't too long, didn't read, but this is effectively a three-party or a tri-party arrangement where the supplier installs an agreed solution for the benefit of an end user customer, and then effectively sells the repayment stream into a third-party financing company. So I'm going to use throughout this, I'm going to use some rather generic terms. And I'm trying to do the best of bridging both those who have seen this and know about it and
Mhm.
those who haven't seen it before. So the terminology may be a bit mixed, but let me see what I can do for it. So first of all, there is a solution. Now, the solution itself is the cluster of hardware, software, installation, licenses, and any support. So it's not just you hiring, let's say, taking a hire purchase or a car lease on an
Mhm.
automobile where there's only one asset. These are clusters of assets that might be in different areas. My experience with this has been with technology and IT financing through Dell, Econocom, GE, and so forth. And what's happened there is there's been multiple vendors, multiple suppliers all trying to put things together. So you could call it akin to sort of a project finance, and it will have a sort of project finance vibe about it. But this is what's going on. And another thing, just to give you an idea of my experience, and again, I'm not trying to be like exhaustive or comprehensive over all of this, but my experience has been this is for capital expenditure solutions, typically north of about 250,000 pounds, dollars, euros, throw the currency in there, but roughly that sort of value, up to probably the 10, 20-ish million dollar range. That's where I've spent a lot of my time in this. There are people who have probably a lot more sophistication than I am, who have had this at, let's say, more at a higher value, or this has been at with more suppliers. So there are so many variations to this. But in short, it works like this. The supplier would be the one, they're the one that puts the thing together, if you like. They put all the assets, they put the entire solution together. They install that into the customer. So this could be your university, your government entity, corporate entity, that sort of thing. And there's a contract to repay over time. That's important. It's not just a once-off transaction. This is a repayment over time. So let's have a look at that. That contract is executed and then sold onto finance company. Finance company provides the financing, clues in the name, and then once that has been done, the customer, the user of the solution, doesn't pay the supplier, but instead the payments are directed to the finance company. Okay, so far so good?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I'll just go through the players of the fielding, and this is to give you an idea just of the vernacular that I'm using within this presentation. So the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, these are the people who make the stuff or provide the software or provide the license, but they're the ones that do. So they're like your Dell, Cisco, Siemens, Philips, they make
Mhm.
the stuff. Or it could be the software providers like F5 or Juniper. That's Dell, EMC. Those sort of they actually make the stuff. The supplier is the one who's putting it all together. And within this scenario, they're very much the key player. They're pretty much the star shows. They've got top billing within this transaction. They become the squeeze point. The customer, they're the end user, they're the beneficiary. They're the NHS, they're the university, they're the they're the rail user, they're the building user, what have you. But they are the one who are actually going to benefit from using the thing. The finance company, as you can imagine, bankrolls the entire exercise. Now, what will happen is that I'll start introducing, and again, my vernacular may be all over the place, and please put a check on me if I am if there is confusion. I'm not meaning to introduce confusion into this, but there are a lot of moving parts. So I'm going to try to just make sure that I'm aligned with what the audience is doing. So the assigner and the assignee, you'll hear these words, and effectively it's like the payor and the payee. It is the assigner is the one that assigns, that's the verb, assigns it to the finance company. The finance company is the recipient of the benefits of the contract. Okay. The solution, again, I'm going to use that as a very generic term to show you, to represent the thing that's being installed, the thing that's being financed. Okay, the assets, the software, the licenses, the backup service, and so forth. Okay. Now, I'll just put this, and again, there's probably a lot more nuance in this, but I'm going to be very, very, just very, I suppose, broad, so I could capture as much of the audience as I can. So effectively, we've got different kind of financing that a lot of people work on. I know these are the main ones. I know there's a lot more. There's aircraft financing, project financing, commodities financing. I understand all that. But effectively, the way this works is that you've got your short-term working capital solutions, typically the invoice factoring and discounting family of financing. You've got, they're pretty much up to 12 months. You really want to get the invoice cycle aligned within one fiscal period. So that means I am thinking of this within a 12-month sort of cycle. Typically, you're looking at payment within 30, 60, 90 days. So that's where I'm going with that. Number two is the the more, I suppose, versatile types of financing, the working capital, the short-term capital, maybe up to midterm. They're up to sort of 2 years. They're revolving credit lines. They're asset-backed lending, where there is a sort of like a floating balance on this. There's no necessarily fixed amount of what this is aligned to. It effectively is there just to support the working capital requirements of the business. And then you've got the longer term ones. These are your leases, your term loans, and our friend right here, assignment of receivables. That's really its home base. That's where it's best suited. Now, you could probably structure something where you have assignment of receivables in a shorter term. I would align that by using, let's say, a 747 to do short haul flights between Manchester and Dublin. You could probably do it, but it's not the best use of it. There's a lot of manual work. There's a lot of labor that goes into these transactions, even if it is set up as a kind of facility. But there is a minimum amount of fixed human capital that's got to go into this. There's a lot of legal work that needs to be done. You've got to make sure that your operations are in check as well. So this isn't something that is necessarily set for, quick life cycle. It's got a longer sort of life cycle in play for it. Okay. And as I was alluding to, where is this best placed? Longer term assets and infrastructure projects. That's really where this gets its value. And especially it solves the problem that I'll get on in a little moment about who is what to do if you've got multiple sort of procurement channels that you've got to look at. And in one sense, you could probably think of this as maybe I don't know, somebody sitting in a hospital who wants to refurbish maybe part of their IT system. They've got to go out to suppliers that give the equipment. Then they've got to engage licenses. There might be some software on top of that. There might be accreditation and support. They can do that themselves, fine, and there are plenty of large corporations and government institutions that are set up for that. But there's an increased complexity that seems to be showing up in the marketplace. And this is really the problem that it's meant to solve. And again, as I said, it's more so for the larger ticket value, not necessarily the smaller transactions. So it's probably not going to get a lot of SMEs out of something if they're looking at, let's say, revolving credit lines for, let's say 50, 70, 100,000 euros, dollars, that sort of thing. It's better placed for a larger value. And I really hope I haven't lost the audience so far on that. Just move ahead.
Yeah, we just go ahead.
Okay, then fine. So Here's the problem. You've got a guy who, let's say, works at a university. He's got to implement, let's say, a large security installation. He's got to put in a something for the CCTVs. He's got to put in something for the IT. So in putting in the IT, he's got to there's got to be a lot of licenses in place. So he's now they're dealing with multiple suppliers. Wouldn't it be great if you just had one single supplier for everything? That'd be brilliant. And the other thing is they don't necessarily want to chalk it up right now. Some of these solutions, when you get into 5, 7, 10, $20 million, for example, it's not like that a lot of companies are just sitting on that and just can put that through. That's going to have an impact on their credit lines. So wouldn't it be fabulous if a long-term financing solution was in place? So let me just illustrate the problem here. Here you've got a whole bunch. Here you've got somebody trying to put together a rather complicated solution. And I really hope that looks ugly and disorganized. And if I've done my job right, there are some people right now that are looking at that graphic and thinking, what the hell is going on there? If they're doing that, I've done my job right, because this is to show the complexity. So you've got the customer trying to establish individual relationships with multiple suppliers. With that comes multiple invoices and purchase orders, all of which have their own nuance to deal with. Not only that, forget if there's any sort of support or licensing or ongoing contracts that need to be supported over, let's say, the life of the asset. You can see, Andre, over here that this is starting to it looks messy, doesn't it? Does that look messy?
Not too much, I would say.
Okay. Okay, next time I'll put a few more graphics and slides and everything like that, but I wanted that to be really, really busy and confusing. Anyway, maybe the supplier can come to the rescue. Now, this is the group that procures all the goods, all the services and bits and pieces. So the supplier deals with all of those. Fantastic. Configures the solution. As you can appreciate, if you're putting something together that does have complexity, you don't just open it up. A lot of it isn't plug and play. A lot of it is very much comes in pieces, and you've got to wire that up to your own configuration. You've got to make sure that it's compatible with any number of legacy systems, any number of new or, let's say, old infrastructure. For example, over in the UK, the Elizabeth line that was recently put in, and I'm just using this as a project example, there was something like about 8 or 10 different signaling systems that had to be harmonized so that the train could run, let's say, from Reading over to Canary Wharf. It's not just a simple purple line on a map. There was all manner of complexity involved. So things have got to be configured. Nowadays, things have got to be tailor-made to a whole bunch of legacy systems. So your supplier will configure that and then deploy it to the customer. Now, in an ideal world, you would just simply raise an invoice, and maybe the supplier could have some payment terms, either one or several. That'd be fabulous. However, and this is typically now, again, this is a lot what's going on, but I broke down what does a standard capital expenditure purchase look like? And it effectively looks like that. 1, you agree what the project looks like. 2, you raise purchase orders. 3, then the supplier has got to raise purchase orders on their suppliers. 4, you've got shipping the product. 5, there's a configuration. 6, you've got to raise, Okay, yeah. 6, you've got to raise then you've got invoices that they've got to pay, and then there's invoices the customer has got to pay, and then payments have got to be made and everybody's happy. But what does that look like from a cash flow point of view? And again, this is just assuming that everyone's got the capital. This is just assuming everyone's got the money. Okay. So first of all, the supplier will owe the OEMs as a creditor. So there's invoice terms there on that side of the house. Then they've got to hold the asset in place and configure it and maybe draw from their existing inventory, or maybe they've got to pull in more inventory. So they've got to hold on that. Then they can't really invoice it. There might be some down payments, there might be some deposits or some escrow or collateral that could be put in play here. But it's going to be very difficult for the supplier to give a full invoice for a full solution unless a full solution has been deployed. And then once that's done, then the customer can pay the supplier the terms. Now, if you think of it, for those in the audience who maybe just do a B2B, who do a short-term credit, then if you think about this as just simply the shipment process, POs raised and so forth, it'll be similar. But now what we're talking about is multiple boxes, multiple shipments, multiple bits and pieces being all put in here. And you can see what the working capital requirement, again, any credit manager knows this one. You simply take the time that you are holding it in your warehouse plus the time that you are giving your customer to pay, less the time you can get on credit. That works out to be your working capital requirement. So quick example for just working that through. Let's say that you've got you're a supplier, you have got 30 days terms on any payments you need to make for your invoices. You might have the your end user customer that is maybe seeking 45 days. And you'll see this a lot. Depending on the size of the institution, that also gives size of the negotiating power, as you can probably appreciate. The bigger you are as a customer, the more you can dictate the terms. Okay. So let's just say in this space, the customer has got a little more negotiating power, and they can put in 45 days. So it works out there that you've got 45 days credit from your customer, 25 days to configure your stuff, less the 30 days that you've got from your suppliers. That gives you 40 days working capital that you've got to fix. Again, let's stretch the math out a little further. Here, we've got a customer who is demanding even more lenient credit terms, and your solution is going to take another 35. It's going to take 35 days, a lot longer to configure. So you've got 95 days on your side, 30 days on their side. So that works out to be a 65-day working capital requirement. Now, imagine if your customer says, yeah, I don't really have all that money straight off. That's going to be a bit of a thing. I don't suppose you could arrange finance terms over 4 years. Well, that's going to look something like that. And you've got a working capital requirement of about, 17,525 days.
I'm sorry, can you stop here? Can you stop here? 17,520 days. This means about 20 years.
It should be 40.
No.
48 months. I've got my maths wrong. Sorry.
How many months? Sorry.
Did I get my maths?
Yeah.
Sorry, no, I got my maths wrong on that. Sorry, I'm going to correct that. Thanks for the pickup there.
Yeah, so 7,000 days.
Yeah, I'll go back. I'll get rid of that. I'll correct that later. Yes.
No. I'm not saying correcting. I'm just saying. So okay, this could also be the case, because I mean we're speaking about 48 years, so that's okay. I mean, as good credit term as any other.
Okay, fine. So that works out to be okay. So it's a little bit long. Okay, fine. Thanks very much for picking it up, Andrew. Yes. Actually, for those who do have their calculators out, it's 1,440 days.
It's
so
okay. I mean, this could be 50 days for capital goods, for things like that. I mean, for 50 years. We should not reject. This could be the business case as any other. There is no irony in my words. Please don't get me wrong.
Yes, indeed. But thanks for that, Andrew. Appreciate you picking that up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just moving that. Let's see if that moves forward. Sorry, I'll just see if that moves forward. Wait a minute. You did it. Thing there. I was so small. Okay, there we go. 1,148. So as you can see, that's still going to be a fairly significant working capital requirement. So what? Sorry, Andrew.
Well, it's okay, please.
Okay. So what are the marketing implications on this? You're a supplier, and you're starting to see more and more clients with a demand for repayment plans. It's harder for them. They're companies all over, whether they're large companies or SMEs, they're trying to preserve capital. And dipping in and throwing several million at a CapEx project, for example, versus maintaining that for working capital. These are now very significant discussions that companies are having, the treasuries, the treasurers and companies are having, the CFOs and companies are having, the procurement departments are having within these larger spaces. So they're thinking, we really want to stretch terms out. And the supplier who can offer that is in a really good position to take up on that demand. So if a supplier does have the ability to bake in a repayment plan, this is going to mean they can take on that opportunity. From what I understand, I think trade capital, pardon me, over 2023, I think it was something like about $2.3 trillion of trade capital globally was in place. So there, and that was up by about 15 to 20% from previous year. So there is definitely a demand there. The problem is the banks are very cautious. Banks don't really want to get front line with these type of transactions. They're complicated. They involve assets which are not their specialty. They involve the operational performance within the supplier, the solution provider, who they may or may not be equipped to deal with. They don't have that specialty in there. Now, I understand some banks have their own specialist finance divisions that deal with this sort of capital expenditure and project expenditure. But for the most part, banks are trying to just draw back a little and just stick to more cash flow management, and that's certainly within the medium sort of ticket space. And the other thing is that the equipment manufacturers, they don't want to get involved. They just want to make the sale. They don't want to get involved in getting caught up in a 2 or 3 or 10 chain link to a final sale. They just want to move their equipment, especially if there's distributors involved. They just want to move their equipment, and they don't really care about the underlying project. They just want to ship it and have the invoice paid. So what are the funding options for a supplier who wants to take advantage of this sort of thing, however, might not have the money on hand? Well, there's a few things they can do. Number one, they can just seek extending their bank lines to cover this. They might just put in something that takes in they might just want to increase the amount of funding they have to bankroll these 3, 4, 5-year transactions. And the clue is right there. They're looking to bankroll this. Now, the upside is that they have control of the relationship. They've got control of the customer. They've got control of the assets, the sales cycle. They've got control of everything. The downside is they really need to now start setting themselves up almost as a quasi bank. That means it's going to take them longer to recognize revenue. When you ship something and the invoice is paid, that's when you recognize it. However, if there is a payment plan in place, you have to recognize the revenue over a period of time, not just one fiscal year. This could go into 2, 3, 4 years before you can actually say, I've collected all of the money required in that sale. And Andrew, I know you and I know on your other credit chats, there's that when's the sale complete? It's when you've collected all the money, correct?
Yeah.
So this has the disadvantage also. You've got to leverage up your balance sheet. You've got operational burdens, and in some places you might also fall under some sort of regulatory requirement. You might have to be a licensed financier. I think, let's say in Germany, BaFin kicks in pretty quickly on this sort of thing. And then you've got to engage in long-term credit risk. You have effectively become not only a supplier, a procurer, a developer of equipment and selling of solutions, whatever they might be, but you're a bank as well. Sometimes that works, but it takes a lot of work. You could just simply introduce these transactions to a third-party financier. So you could get one of the large banks involved, or even one of the challenger banks involved. I know that's certainly a trend within the market. And you just simply say, I am going to I'm going to not make the invoice out to myself, but I'm going to sell it on to a bank. So the bank might lease it, they might put it under a secured loan or a HP, which is fine. And the upside about there might be some referrals, some commissions that you as a supplier would receive because you're being an introductory channel to the bank. So there's that commercial aspect. The trouble is the bank now has a little more. I'm going to use bank, but it could be finance company as well. If you just simply introduce the whole thing over, then now the bank has got a little bit more say in what that transaction looks like. They can start dictating pricing. They can start dictating what the rates are, what the credit term is. They might say, we don't really want to give 5 million on that solution. We're only happy to give 4. Now you've got a bit of a problem because they're starting to dictate what sort of pricing can be about. So now the supplier's got to run around to other banks, or he's got other banks on panel or something like that. So there is that sort of control element that gets surrendered. You don't take the risk, but you also don't have the control, and that's another issue. This is probably one of the better solutions. It kind of gets the best of both worlds. You still have control over the relationship, and that's key to suppliers. The relationship with the end user customer. Is it a repeat business? Certainly if it's required to do upgrades, to do swap outs, to do improvements on it, you've got a lot more control. The supplier has control over what the solution is going to look like, and they can, like I say, increase it or modify it at any time. The downside to the supplier is that they will have to have, now that they are in league with a finance company, with a bank, there has to be some level of operational alignment. So they will need to get a very sharp back office. They have to have that improved. They also might need to increase their capital. So, and we'll get on to the sort of the treasury implications in a little bit. But if you're going to be part of the relationship, and certainly part of the maybe of the billing and collecting cycle, then you've got to make sure you've got, as a supplier, if you're a middleman, you have to make sure you've got a bit of a buffer in terms of cash. And secondly, thirdly, sorry, the finance company might come along and say, hey, look, we need to audit what's going on. We've got regulatory compliance to deal with. There is risk there, and this is how we have to mitigate the risk. So we have to come along a couple of times a year, or maybe just once a year, and you've got to open your books and walk through things with us. So those are the sort of like the good and the bad that I can see from a supplier thinking, how do I get involved in this longer term play that is coming up with the more complicated solutions? So that's that there. Andrew, is there anything on the questions there, or are people just kind of zoning out, or if I got them on the?
Well, we still,
I'm
so
just
far we
fortunate
don't
to have
have
them.
questions, but I am not surprised, honestly. I'm not surprised. It's just like because what you are explaining now is something very close to quantum physics, I believe. So
I really hope not. I really hope not. So yeah. By the way, if anyone's chatting with me or anything like that, I can't see it. So please just chat with
yes,
just with Andrew.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat anyway, so don't worry about that. So you are not. I mean, sorry for this silence. We had the technical issue in the beginning, and but I believe we will have lots of questions when we will share the record.
Okay, understood. Okay, so just moving on.
Yes.
We'll just go on to again what this actually looks like, and sorry, let me go back. Pardon me. So again, the same tri-party agreement is in place where you have the supplier. There is an overarching service agreement that stands between the customer and the supplier. That dictates what assets are going to be put in place, what's the service and the performance requirements metrics, any sort of service level agreements are baked in there. So if, for example, there is a storage solution technology or a telecoms, what is the time that the supplier has to respond to any downtime, for example? What is if there's a breakage in one of the units? What's the maintenance turnaround? So the service agreement or the master service agreement, it hangs over all of that. The purchase agreement, or what's going to be called the MSPA, the Master Service Sale and Purchase Agreement, that stands between the supplier here, I'll spare you the animation, and the finance company here. That dictates how the channel of transactions are going to happen. Now, there's some layers on this. That master agreement takes care of all transactions. Now, the transactions could be one per customer. So it could be the only time that this particular customer has a a contract assigned to the finance company is once, or it could be that there is a rather complicated installation and the customer has multiple tranches to draw down. So they have to, let's just try a large retailer, and they have a rollout, let's say, in their northern district. And that is one tranche of work. Then they have it in their eastern district. That's another tranche of work. Then they have it for their warehouse and their back office. That's another tranche of work. And there are all multiple transactions that are being funneled through for the same customer under this. So that's part of where the benefit goes. I've got a really boring slide now, which goes to show the transactions and what's in play. You can screenshot that if it's easier, or if this is being recorded, you can get back to it later. But what this details is the items, and this isn't exhaustive. These are just the general terms and conditions. And again, speak to your lawyers. You've really got to get legal involved in the nuance of this, because what's super important is that you can structure something like this, but it has to fit what your customer wants. It's no use having a finance solution if it's going to have terms and conditions that are so restrictive, it can't effectively go to market. And I know this is weird to say for a credit guy, but for the most part, I think a lot of credit people kind of misunderstand where they are within the sort of scope of things. There is a lot of people think a lot of credit folks think that all they do is just a control function. And I would say that's true, but they're not completely a control function. They are, in fact, in the sales game. The credit function is within the sales enablement function. They perform the control aspect of it, but they're there to enable sales. And it's really important that I suppose my credit people, if you like, the genre that I'm in, understand that. But all of that said, if you're putting something together, it's got to be fit for purpose. It's got to be able to help you execute on a sale. And effectively what's happening here is that on the customer side, the customer supplier side, on the left-hand side, this shows really what the thing does. How is the solution to perform, and how is it being repaid? The finance company is really only interested in the economic elements of it. Are you going to be around? What's your credit profile look like? Is there a chance of non-payment? Is there a chance of insolvency? That's what that side of the house is meant to do. And as I'll get on, really, the financier is trying to stay as they want to be passive in this transaction. They don't want to get involved in that. And I'll give an example a little later, but it's very similar to, Andrew, let's just say that you buy the latest iPhone, and for some reason you drop the screen or it's not working. If you have a contract, unless you bought the thing outright, if you've got the usual sort of 2-year payment plan, you'll find that the telephone company really doesn't care if you've smashed the screen or something. They're still expecting you to pay for the thing. They might enter into some level of conversation with you if the thing doesn't work and it's under warranty, for example. But for the most part, with a phone or for a car, if the car breaks down or you bend it up, the car company's still going to want you to pay. And that's effectively what we're seeing here within the finance companies' relationship, what their engagement is. They don't really want to be held hostage by saying the performance of the thing isn't happening, therefore the customer's disrupted payment. And that again shows you that within the supplier, within the provider, the solution provider, they're the ones really that are the star of the show. I'll give you a quick, again, just screenshot this, but this gives you a rough idea of the documentation. If nothing else, you can see that the finance company here is starting to bear a little bit more risk on the transaction within the relationship. So for the most part, as long as the solution works, as long as the payments come, it just works like a regular loan. But sometimes they're a step in. So let's just we'll get onto what that looks like a little bit later. But moving forward, let's just work out what the benefits are. I'll just go back to some of the benefits. First of all, the supplier, if they sell those receivables, they can actually realize that entire sale. Yeah. So they can actually say, right, I've sold this thing off. I don't now need to worry about collecting it over time. That's the finance company's job. That's the bank's job to do that. It liberates them from working capital. If you can remember, you could see the sort of squeeze that was going to be put in there, even for just modest increases in terms. It does give them some oxygen when it comes to their working capital, and they can still control the commercial relationship. The finance company, they benefit because there's ideally, a reliable flow of business that comes through for them and increases their portfolio. They've got a trusted partnership, and there's potential cross-selling, although the two asterisks do say that is subject to terms and conditions. It could be that the finance company is more than happy to cross-sell maybe a product that doesn't overlap into the suppliers. So they couldn't say, hey, we can resell you a line from a rival firm, for example. They can't do that. And the customer benefits as well, because they're dealing with a finance company, even though we've all got our own view about what a regulated entity looks like. The one thing I will say about being in a regulated entity, you know the rules. And the rules are fairly clear, and you have to abide by them fairly strictly. So that means the behavior of the finance company is fairly well dictated. In the UK, we call it the Financial Conduct Authority, and the clue is in the name. They actually look at the conduct of that financial institution. So that's why for a customer, it's really good to get involved in someone who that's their stream of work. They just deal with the finance. Of course, there's risks involved, and I really hope, again, people are having a head-scratching moment on that. But what I tried to do in all manner of ways is to demonstrate which way the risks flow and the size of those risks. So the arrowhead, for example, I'll just show you here, what we're saying is the finance company is incurring risk from the supplier in all these orange little bubbles. The supplier is incurring risk from the customer from these areas. The customer is incurring risk from the supplier in these areas, the performance and the implementation. And the finance company incurs risk from the customer going this way. The big problems that the finance company are going to have are insolvency and non-payment. Other things are potential fraud, maybe change of ownership, change of legislation that can upset some longer term contracts, especially if there is a remedial legal question that needs to be answered, within the life cycle of a transaction. So those are the risk map. That's sort of a heat map for which way the risk is going. There is probably a better way to do it, but that's the best way I could find out here. Again, remember what I said. The only risk that the supplier and the end user customer will incur from the finance company is their conduct. So only if the finance company goes rogue and does something really stupid, then there could be backlash on both the supplier and the customer. Again, because of regulatory oversight, I'm putting that risk as being fairly low. Certainly in my experience and certainly in my observations and research, that's what I've noticed there. And a few other things about this. You've got to understand what's being sold, and these are some of part of what's being sold to the finance company has to happen in these ways. There's a provision that pops up all the time called hell and high water. Now, there are some areas that may be disputed. There are some jurisdictions that may be disputed, but the finance company is looking for a reliable payment stream, and I think that kind of falls under their IFRS 9, to make sure that the payments can come through with very little disruption or question. What this is saying is if the thing's broken, the finance company still kind of says, well, that's really not our problem, we still need payment. It then gets down to a question of who becomes liable for that. The other thing is it's got to be a fixed payment. If you just take into account even something simple like your phone contract, unless you've got like unlimited balance, unlimited text, unlimited data, or something like that, there might be a variable component to that. Actually, probably more so within a car, let's say a car lease. You know what the cost of the car is, but there might be a component for extra mileage that's built on that. A finance company can't take the variable part. They have to know what the fixed repayments under the contract are. So there can't be any variation on this. And the other thing is, like I've said earlier, the finance company isn't a technical specialist. They consider themselves passive within the design, implementation, and deployment and performance of the solution. It's not really on them to step in if there is a performance shortfall. So those are key
Kind
things.
of,
There's
it's
probably
kind
other things.
yeah, sorry,
Sorry, Andrew, please.
just what rings a bell in my head that it's very close to letter of credit. So when we look at letter of credit in this terms, so you just mentioned that financial institution is not actually checking the performance of the contract.
Exactly.
Yeah, the real idea for them is to provide finance and get repayment. I can understand
That's
that
right.
because they got very tiny margin on that. So for them,
Yeah.
they take high exposure to get quite tiny margin. So it's not like we are trying to. I'm just addressing this to the audience. Please, these are different roles. These are
That's
different
exactly
roles.
right.
So you want to ride your bike, but you're supposed to remember about those who buys this bike.
Hmm. That's right. That's right. And that's a good thing as well. The margins that the controlling of the pricing as well, and it's the total price, or what I used to hear in my leasing circles, is the total cost of ownership. It's two things. So, and there could be different pricing involved. If you just buy the thing capex outright, you might get a different price to the total cost of owning the thing, or the total cost of utilizing a solution over a period of time that's, let's say, provided
Yes.
within either a lease loan or certainly in an assignment context.
Yes.
So just going through how it works, and sorry,
Please
just
go
going
ahead.
through how it works. And sorry, Andrew.
Just go ahead. Just go ahead.
Okay, fine. Okay, so just walking it through effectively, and you can read the text if you wish, but I'll verbalize it as well. The supplier configures the equipment and then installs it into the customer. The customer then executes documentation for the solution, which includes the repayment schedule as well. So there's two documents that are effectively going in. This is what we're putting in, Mr. Customer, and this is what you're going to pay on it over time. Okay. The repayment schedule is then sent over to the finance company together with the confirmation documentation. So what the finance company is going to say, okay, if I'm buying this from you, is the customer happy with it? Because I'm not going to take ownership of this contract if it's still being put together. I want the thing completed. So it's important that you, as a supplier, make sure that the customer is happy with the implementation. When that's done, the finance company will then be able to buy the completed, if you like, the completed solution. And understand this could be a part solution. So the customer might be more than happy to say, okay, that part of the project is implemented. I'm happy to start paying on that. So they could execute on that portion of it. There might be other portions to go, but even if it all like stops or something, they can say, right, what we did, let's say up in Scotland, or what we did up in Northern Europe, for example, is working, it's functioning, so I'm okay to pay on that. This could be, getting back, if the assignment is disclosed, this is another nuance that we'll get onto. If the assignment is disclosed, the customer might be advised to pay the finance company directly. So it would be similar to you go into a car yard and the finance company isn't owned by the manufacturer of the automotive company, the manufacturer of the auto. So there could be two separate things. So then you as the customer will be advised, hey, you bought your Volvo from this particular car yard. Thank you very much. They have sold us over the repayment stream and you'll be repaying us. So, Nordic Auto Services, for example. The relationship between I'm getting some feedback. Am I or some talking? Sorry.
No, it's okay.
The relationship. Okay, sorry. The relationship between the supplier and their external suppliers, the OEMs, that's kind of separate from this. In one sense, the finance company is again saying that's kind of your problem. Okay. And I'll just walk through how the documentation's all put together. So between the customer and the supplier, there is what they call an MSA, a master service agreement. This governs the relationship. As I said earlier, this is the document that says what's being installed, how it's going to perform, how the supplier how the supplier is going to make sure that the solution performs over the life cycle of the agreement. So if I've got a 4-year IT installation, I want to make sure that I, as a customer, have someone to call if the thing breaks. All of that is within the supplier agreement. The MSPA, Master Sale and Purchase Agreement of the assigned transactions. This says, what do we do if something goes wrong with the client? What do we do if someone doesn't pay? What do we do if there is some sort of change in the economic structure of either the supplier or the customer? There's been a lot of M&A, mergers and acquisitions activity. So there's customer, for example, that might have been publicly listed that got one particular credit grade. Then they are subject to a leveraged buyout from a private equity firm, and then their grade drops down quite a bit. They get delisted, and then that brings in more risk to that client. The finance company might have something to say about that, and to say, all right, okay, we need to maybe review what the client looks like. We might need to even provision more something. We might need something from the supplier. Different things might happen. So what happens is, first of all, the customer executes the repayment schedule with the supplier. The supplier will then executes the offer document and assigns this to the finance company. So it's not just, we'll get onto this coming up, but it's not just the cash flows that are important here. There are other elements to this assignment that are very, very important that we'll get onto. The supplier then forwards the repayment schedule, again, with other documents that back up what the sale are. And again, if this is a disclosed agreement, what will happen is that the finance company will forward a notice of assignment over to the customer and say, hey, look, your supplier has sold us the payment schedule and the rights and the benefits that are attached to that. Could you please say, yes, that's okay? And they acknowledge that, and they say, right, we understand now that you have ownership and we have to pay you, for example. So let's just look at what the payment. So when the payment schedule goes over, there's a few things that are in play. It's not just the cash flows. There are a few other things that are in play as well. The contract rights and the equipment title. So let's just look at what that is. The assigned payments, they're the cash flows that come in. They're the 48 payments over 48 payments of 50,000 that'll happen over the 4 years. That's fairly simple. The other thing is are the contract rights. Now, the reason that they are important is depending on the relationship. If there is a non-payment, for example, between the customer and the finance company, it's important that the finance company can then enact recovery or action on the customer and say, hey, you haven't paid us. If the contract rights, this is very rare that this would happen, the contract rights don't get assigned for whatever reason, but if they're not, what has to happen is the finance company has got to go to the supplier and say, hey, we haven't received payment yet. We believe the client might be in default. We need you to go in and ask them. And it removes the control that they've got, and it introduces an element of risk. The other thing is equipment title. Now, in a simple transaction where you have the sale, let's say automotive or IT equipment, you think fine, that gets sold that gets installed into a commercial environment. But what happens if it's, let's say, a hospital or a rail company or the police force, for example? It might be that gets excluded from the assignment because they're not going to have the finance company come into a hospital and take away, I don't know, some computers that patients might be impacted by. So it's important to understand what you are and aren't getting as a finance company when you're purchasing these contracts.
Quite deep view on that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of nuance to this. I'll just quickly walk through what it looks like through a disclosed transaction. So first of all, the payments are received by the supplier. There may be a variable component placed on this as well. But as I said earlier, the variable component is probably a value add, other services that are placed on that are provided by the supplier to the customer, let's say on a monthly basis. So it could be extra call time, extra mileage, extra bandwidth, extra utilization of other on-call resources. Those are between the customer and the supplier. The finance company, as I said, typically will not touch variable payments. And then the payments are taken from the supplier to the finance company. So there's an element of risk that's involved in this. If it's and it might just be also that there is a direct relationship there. So I'll just break this down. Sometimes the supplier will want to just give one invoice to the client for their entire use. And this is one of the big things that that a lot of procurement companies and a lot of end users are looking for. They don't want to have multiple vendors and multiple suppliers and multiple invoices. They just want one invoice. Now, the supplier can provide that one invoice for them. That's the benefit. That's the upside. The customer has only now got to pay one variable invoice for the entire solution, which they know has a fixed and a variable component in there. So they don't have to worry about that. That's the reason why the supplier sometimes will bill and collect for it on behalf of the finance company. Okay. Or sometimes the arrangement could be where the finance company is advised the customer, just pay us directly. Pay us this fixed amount, 48 payments of 20 grand every month, and we will and we'll just deal with that. Any variable component, you deal with that with the supplier. And again, all of these arrangements need to be fleshed out within the context of the sale, the solution, and what finance risk each party is willing to take. Okay. If it's undisclosed, more risk is placed upon the supplier. That means that the customer hasn't been disclosed that there is an underlying finance. As far as they're concerned, the supplier has bankrolled it. The supplier is not only put in the solution, but they've also put in the money, and they're taking the 3 or 4 year risk. Behind the scenes, behind the curtains, there is a financing arrangement that's would effectively be back to back between the customer repayment cycle and the finance company's repayment cycle as well. So they pretty much match. There's, let's say, a 4 year term or a 3 year. There's a 3 year term between the customer and the supplier. There'll be a 3 year term between the supplier and the finance company, with ideally the payments hitting very close to being on the same day. So the payment that comes in from the customer to the supplier will happen at roughly the same day that the supplier will then have to pay the finance company. Again, the supplier is now a high point of risk. And if anything goes wrong, the finance company can't come up from behind the curtain. They are dependent upon the supplier to manage not only the performance arrangement, but also the financial arrangement as well. So any questions? Don't know what people still like to go.
I'm putting my questions on my behalf. Trust me, you will have enough.
Good to know.
You will have enough.
Everything's great until it doesn't work. So what do you do here if, let's say, there is, I'll walk you through the graphic. I don't think I've got animation on this. Animation. No, I haven't. No, sorry. So just go back. So what happens if, let's say, the payment doesn't come? What may happen is the customer might say, the thing isn't working, and that's what I'm doing here. The thing isn't working. I'm not paying.
Oops.
which is fine. But now again, that puts the supplier in a bit of a crunch point. Now, some documentation may mean that irrespective of the performance of the thing, of the solution, the supplier has got to pay us. And it could be that they're given a particular amount of time to pay. So they're saying, right, you have to bankroll. So the finance company says to the supplier, you've got to bankroll your problem to me. You have to pay me and you've got to go sort that out. Now, that's one scenario. Another scenario is that everybody is on the same page, supplier, finance company, and the customer. And it could be that the customer has said, hey, the thing doesn't work. Or it could be, hey, I've got some cash flow issues right now. Can we work something out? So all three there have to now, in effect, bed together and sort out, right, is there a performance issue with the solution? No. Fine. So then it becomes an economic, a finance, a credit issue with the relationship between the customer and the finance company. Those two now have got to sort things out. The supplier saying, hey, the lights work, everything's fine, there's no problem with service, we've delivered within the contract. Then it becomes a credit issue. So you have to delineate between these. And this is where, again, the supplier becomes pretty much head billing within this transaction. They have to make sure they can say quite confidently, our technical expertise is in place. So to a finance company, and certainly when I was doing this within as a financier, the question was, it wasn't just, will the customer pay? You've almost got to say, will the supplier be able to perform? So I've got two problems there I've got to fix. First of all, do they have technical expertise in this equipment, in this? So if I could just use an example from my technology financing, there's a lot of tech. You'll probably, if you go onto to IT resellers, you will see that they get what I call metal. So you'll see they're a gold reseller, they're a platinum reseller, they're a titanium reseller, they're a silver reseller. So the more of those you see on your supplier's page, the more accreditations you get, the more technical expertise you can say, these guys can support the solution. They know what's going on. They've got the guys on the ground that can fix the problem. So that gets rid of that problem. Will the customer pay because the thing's not working? If you've got a good supplier with solid technical expertise, the answer is yes. If they don't have that, then you can say, okay, we've got a problem here. The customer's withholding payment, and you could probably see it from their point of view. So that's the performance issue. The finance issue is something on top of that as well. And it could be that you're saying, while you are fixing your technical issues, Mr. Supplier, you've got to pay me, the finance company, in lieu of that. Unless the company's become insolvent. In a disclosed arrangement, that becomes acutely more important, because under an undisclosed arrangement, what will happen is that the supplier has really got to fix that problem. And at the same time, they've got to fix that problem, they've got to keep the finance company happy, because as part of this transaction, what they've said is, don't worry about, I don't want you interfering with the relationship. I don't want them knowing that there is a finance element to this. I want them to see that I'm in control of it. And the finance company's got to say, okay, if you want to be in control, but you've also got to be in control of the money that's due me. So again, the risk that you have on a supplier can vary depending upon how much control they place upon on the transaction.
That's quite clear.
And just, yeah. So, and in insolvency, it's fairly simple. Customer says, hey, look, I'm insolvent. You know, the administrators are knocking on my door. Sorry, I'm filing for bankruptcy, something of that nature. So that gets notified to the supplier. The supplier may have to advise the finance company, or the finance company might have to find it for themselves. Or if it's a direct relationship with the customer and the finance company, then they have to disclose what that is. And then it's up to the finance company to either, and depending on the relationship that the transaction and the documentation has had, either to one, work directly with a customer and say, hey, we've got to kind of work this out in a recovery area, or two, number three, the supplier is involved to work out on behalf of the finance company as like a representative or an agent. It might be that here the supplier can say, hey, if we repossess the equipment, we can look to start applying that to the outstanding debt that's owed by the customer. So again, all of this there's a lot of moving parts in these sort of things. They're not unmanageable, but you do have to know the players on the field. So just some closing thoughts on this. Just on mine, and we'll get some discussion going, hopefully. Number one, always involve legal. Even if it appears to be a standard transaction, you've got to make sure that what's being negotiated between the customer and the supplier and what you're going to purchase from the supplier makes sense. It fits in with, let's say, agreed templates. And terms and conditions will need to align with that. Secondly, jurisdiction. Within various countries, they have various laws that govern what treatment is available to each one of these parties. So I know of times in going for public tenders going for tenders for public sector business in Europe, there are some jurisdictions that say it has to be an undisclosed arrangement. Okay. We can't have a finance company that is seen to be involved. Even though we might know that there is funding available, we can't deal directly with we can't deal indirectly with a finance company. We have to deal solely with the supplier. That's the way it works. And the other thing is, like I hope I've demonstrated to you, transparency between the finance company and the supplier is key. So you've got to make the finance company, it's on them to make sure that the suppliers that they are dealing with have the technical expertise, the operational expertise to manage the solution in its life cycle. And if there is any risk or any potential that there is a disruption, you've got to see that your supplier has got maybe a little bit of a buffer, a cash flow piggy bank, to look after some of the shortfalls in payments and make up for that, because they want to control a relationship. This is part of controlling the relationship. So I'll pause right now. I'm sure everyone's sick of the sound of my voice, and maybe there's some questions I could take here. Let's have a listen. Thanks, Andrew.
Well, Brett, thank you very much for this great presentation. It actually, blows a lot of fireworks in my head. But let me start, because I'm really interested in, and I will have to rewatch this this video maybe 5 times, because the issue is complicated. But what I am trying to say in a very general terms. So you say from the very beginning that, well, if we take into account complication, let's start from the very beginning, let's start from the start. We can see that the structuring of such a transaction takes lots of time, efforts of lots. I mean, it's cross-functional collaboration. Otherwise, it would never fly. So there is no wonder that such a thing is only relevant to big-ticket transactions.
Yes.
Otherwise, I mean, well, it's just like establishing a letter of credit for $10,000 or something like that. Yeah, so that this is one thing. But second thing, and what I understand is that this is always 3-side agreement. So let me ask my first question. If I understand correctly, there is, so far, based on your experience, there is no way just to have an arrangement, let's say in the contract between trade supplier and trade customer, that if customer doesn't pay, the supplier is allowed to collect cash of the customer's own customers. That's the way it looks like. It looks like the assignment of receivables looks like in the eyes of trade credit manager.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll just get back.
I mean, I understand that we can have this in the contract, but there might be no direct or practical way how to implement it, how to enforce that.
Yeah. My experience has been if the thing doesn't work, the customer's going to halt all payments. Typically, that's what they will do. And
Yeah, no,
then
that's different story. We were speaking about, let's say, we are speaking about supply of whatever FMCG items. Yeah. So let's try, because that's the simplistic picture which is still sitting in my head. Yeah, I am supplier of glasses.
Right.
I'm a producer of glasses. I'm selling them to the retail, or no, not to the retail, to the wholesale customer who is selling them to the retail. Yeah.
Right.
And then I might have different solutions for that, most known of them, which is sitting in the contract, which could be kind of return ROM, ROT, retention of title. Yeah, but why don't we have a contract provision that if my wholesale customer does not pay me, I can go to his customer and collect cash from them? Like, say, sending the letter. If this guy didn't pay me, you are allowed to pay. They didn't, so now you have to pay me.
Okay. So
But that's already complicated, because if I understand why I use this example, because if I understand correctly, assignment of receivables presumes that the supplier from the very beginning gives up their right to collect cash to the financial company.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is happening in the very beginning. So it is not like pledge. It is not like just in case. It's close to the factoring arrangement, or email similar to factoring arrangement, that customers of that supposed pay not to the supplier, are supposed to pay directly to the financing company.
Exactly. Yeah.
So generally speaking, this structure, and this is like already signed agreement between the two parties, that the customer is paying to the financing company, not to the supplier, and
Correct.
which presumes that legally the right to collect, or the obligation becomes the obligations changes the owner. So from
That's
the
right.
very beginning. So it's not, again, this is not just in case. This is not like a pledge. If customer doesn't pay, I got an option too. This receivables are assigned from the very beginning.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
So
And
that, please.
no, I was going to say yes. And the collection, the the collection of monies from the customer is limited is limited on effectively two ways. Number one, the supplier, the repayments that is shown in the repayment schedule. So only those monies are due, within the fixed term, for example. There might be other penalties for non-payment and so forth, but I'm not ignoring those. I'm ignoring those. And secondly, the finance company can only collect what they've been sold. So there's that there. There's no way for us. It's not like a factoring arrangement where the supplier can go to the customer's customer and collect invoices from there. That's not available.
Yeah. But thanks for mentioning performance, because here we might have a look at the whole structure with the eyes of the financing company, because I mean, the factor in sound mind and memory suppose not to engage into the transaction which presumes dispute, because otherwise they get in trouble.
Right.
So supplier, normal factors supposed to only buy obligations which are recognized by customer as unconditional obligation to pay. So meaning accepted transactions. Again,
Yes.
ladies and gentlemen, please be clear. We are not trying to get bread out of lawyers, because each time you got doubt, lawyer's opinion should prevail. So let me say that.
Exactly.
But in this case, finance company takes much more risks than factor does, because
Yes.
they are on the actual side of the transaction, if I can say so. They are taking both risks, because in the end of the day, obviously they can ignore customers' reluctance to pay. This might be written in 1,000 times in the contract, but in the end of the day, if we put ourselves in the customer's position, if a thing doesn't work, why should
Yeah.
I pay for it? Why
Yeah.
should I pay for it? I bought it, so I got a contract. Thank you very much, because with the high ticket industrial, or extremely expensive IT equipment, yeah, this might not be very close to the skin, but when we got
Okay.
with the iPhone example, is quite clear. I am buying an iPhone, and suppliers say, okay, I will supply you with iPhone, but you will pay to my financing partner. No problem. I have no problem to pay. Then I receive an iPhone. I try to set it up, and it doesn't work.
Mhm.
I give a call to my supplier and say, guys, your iPhone doesn't work. And then in the meantime, okay, the supplier says, okay, please send it back to us, la la la, we will repair, we'll provide a new one. And somewhere in the middle, a financing company calling you and say, where's my money?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
then you can the normal consumer, when we say on a consumer side, it's just like, where's my money? Where's my bloody iPhone? This
Yeah.
goddamn iPhone, because how can I pay for something I didn't receive yet? No, what I'm trying to say is, you see, the iPhone is pretty simple example. Recently, I was watching a nice movie with Kevin Costner. It's about
Okay.
NASA, and it's about the big, IBM stuff, which was brought and was not working, and they were sending Glenn to the space, the first
Yeah.
American
Hidden numbers.
astronaut. Yes, and then all this room, fit by the machine, and which is not working. This is exactly the case.
Mm.
This is
Exactly.
exactly
Yeah.
the case. This is exactly the case. So the machine is brought. Yeah, obviously, we know that iPhone is much more complicated than that machine, because we know that when NASA put a guy on the moon, they had less
Mhm.
advanced technology than we have in our iPhones, and that was about
Exactly.
iPhone 5 already. So iPhone 7 is I can fly into space with my iPhone, but this is exactly the case. So what I'm trying to say, financing company in this case is taking significantly more risks for substantially, or let's say for relatively tiny reward than the supplier does.
That's true. That's true. So again, how you balance out that you've probably heard that old saying, risk versus reward. Okay.
Yeah.
But which is fundamental component of it. There's another leg to that table which a lot of people don't understand. It's risk versus control, and the way that you mitigate risk is to have more and more control.
Yes.
So in this particular case, the finance company again doesn't have much control over the performance of the solution. They have to take that risk on from the supplier. They have to say, I'm not sure if you got my heat map up there, but it shows that the biggest problem that you're going to get let's say in the bottom left-hand corner there, supplier performance. So that is, does the thing work? That's effectively the question you're saying. Does the thing work? The implementation is also, was it delivered in time, and is there, are they going to question it? But let's say that we manage to get the thing in place. So the supply performance is the issue. And then rightly so, the customer will be saying, I asked for a whole thing, but the whole thing isn't working. So that puts a financial risk on the supplier to make good the payments until the problem is rectified. Now, the way that you can kind of I suppose mitigate that, kind of pull that circle in a little tighter, is that if you have high operating proficiency and technical proficiency in your supply, they know how the boxes work, they know how the machines work, they can thump the machine in the right spot and it'll just click up again. That shows that what's mitigated the financial risk there is the performance risk and the technical expertise of the supplier, where they're thinking the chances of downtime, and downtime therefore being used as an excuse for non-payment, is very, very low. So therefore, that inbound payment should always come and not be held hostage to non-performance.
Very clear. Very clear. We got a question from our greatly passionate audience. So I will try to read it. So it's a question from Grant. Reps and warranty to the handset covers this. How would it work in practice, as they have bought it and you fall back on the OEM as you're covered? They still assume same purchase options and warranty covers. So this is about payment terms. So I am not sure you'll fully understand the way it works. I did millions of this with Brett and works exceptionally well.
Okay, I think I know who that is actually. Hi, Grant. Yeah, if it comes down to something like the thing doesn't work, that comes down to the technical proficiency I was just talking about. If it's a warranty claim, that again would probably get excluded from the from the financial arrangement, because what you're saying is, I put in 20 boxes, one of the 20 boxes doesn't work. The technician spilled his coffee on there, or his sausage roll or something like that. So it's then up to the customer and the supplier arrangement under their master service arrangement to take out the bad one out of the 20 boxes and replace it. That's a risk between them. Now, providing that it's of roughly the same value, it should be fine. And the payments should still go back, but really that sides towards a warranty claim. And I would put that, if you've got my heat map on there, the implementation part, I would probably put that as a risk there.
So it was not a question; it was rather a comment. Grant,
okay.
So I mean, if that sentence started, you probably don't understand how the things works. I confiteor, it is a sign, as we say in Latin. I really admit I don't understand. So that's okay. So in the end of the day, it's too much complicated in terms of financing, and it is too much complicated in terms of, let's say, legal structuring to afford using it in the normal, let's say, in the low ticket transactions. And again, it's too much complicated, too expensive, and either the lower transactions will not just justify the cost of all the efforts which might be involved in the transaction of assignment, with assignment of receivables, as we might look. So again, if somebody wants to cover obligations with assignment of receivables, it is better to find simply option than assignment of receivables.
Yeah. It is. That is true. Yeah. If they're, as I've said earlier, it has a level of complete. Now, you can simplify it. You can simply have a single transaction, and it's as long as you can have, let's say, a lease documentation. Let's say,
Mhm.
let's take that. Now, the lease has got the rights to the equipment and the contract rights embedded. Now, you could simply take that and say, right, I am going to assign this lease onto a larger finance company. This happens all the time. Mortgage-backed securities, large
Similar to
portfolio tranches.
reinsurance, if I understand correctly.
Sorry?
Similar to reinsurance, if I understand
Yeah,
correctly.
very similar to reinsurance.
Ideologically, it is very similar to reinsurance.
That's exactly right. And
Mhm.
what the supplier could say is that they could have it branded up where they are actually the lessor.
Mhm.
So you could, and then what they would, and because that there is assignment provisions within that lease. So it could be a car lease, technology lease, what have you. They could simply sell. It's effectively selling that package of receivables and all the contract rights with it, and all of the
Mhm.
equipment title onto another finance company. That arrangement is there, but you will need an overarching transaction document that governs those sales between the between the originator of that lease and the purchaser of the lease, or the assignee of that lease.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Brett, do you still need a presentation? I think we
I
still
can
got
drop.
like 3 minutes. I've asked all my questions, and again, the floor is yours. I really unsure how it is possible to ask any question here, because it was quite difficult for me to find one, but nevertheless, I managed. If you still got, I think as I said, we still got a couple of minutes to question here, because I to ask, and we still got like buffer time. So Brett, we might need to wait another minute to
Okay.
see if there are questions. But again, the event looks great. The event was very informative today, and really, I think the only thing I could do now is to thank you very much for finding time for joining us. And ladies and gentlemen who will be watching us in record, please direct questions, or let's say put them in comment, direct them to Brett Morris. He is quite active on LinkedIn. Direct them to me. If you have questions about assignment of receivables, or say any other questions about credit management, I don't know anybody who would be as knowledgeable about credit management as Brett Morris. So
Thanks so much,
please,
Andrew.
unless he is extremely busy, he would be happy, and he is greatly helpful, because I am asking him very often about the for the advice. So please don't hesitate to share knowledge. Don't hesitate to ask for support in terms of knowledge. Never do that, because this really saves your time, and this really saves your efforts. And as a matter of tradition, I thank very much Brett Morris, and I wish everyone, including Brett Morris, who is continuing to be extremely active in the credit management area. Therefore, he's supposed to have a luck in terms of selling as much as it is possible and losing as less as it is possible to manage to, or as it could be nicely said in an extremely complicated language as French, bon crédit.
Thank you,
See you
Andrew. Thank you,
around
everybody.
and speak soon. Bye
Bye.
bye.